Guys, I think this was a brilliant interview. I leave a link in the description to the entire one. It's almost an hour long, but I wanted to highlight this part here where Zack Polanski is defining what the Green Party stands for now. Now, when we think about the Green Party, we generally think of, and I don't mean any offense by this, but boomer hippies and middle-class people who are disconnected from the realities of ordinary people. And Zack Polanski wants to change that. So have a listen to what he had to say.
Do the Green Old Guard like you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's...
Really? Are you sure?
Yeah.
There's no tension?
I think the tension is about, some of them I think would like to see me talking about the environment more and the climate crisis more, and I think that's undoubtedly a tension. The argument I make to them both publicly and privately is that when you poll people, the Green Party are the most trusted party on the environment, including with other parties.
You've got that territory.
Well, yeah, so when I've got a microphone
definition
with me, why would I convince you of my credentials or the Green Party's credentials on the environment? I mean, I've chaired the Environment Committee for the last few years in London. I deeply care about the environment, but people know that. What they don't know is our plans to tackle the cost of living, our plans to protect the NHS, our policies on education or health. And I think it's important to talk about those other policies, as well as the climate. Climate will always run through everything we do. But in terms of the first thing I talk about, it doesn't make sense to lead on the climate, despite the fact it is the most pressing issue. It's an existential issue. Well, exactly. So we're called the Green Party. Everyone knows that we care about the climate crisis. We want to reduce emissions. We need climate adaptation. I think there's other more interesting routes through it, though. So last week there was a report from the Security Council, the intelligence chiefs of the government, that said the biggest national security threat to this country, or one of the biggest, is food insecurity around the climate crisis. Now, last Thursday, the government were going to launch this report. And according to The Guardian, they've sat on it because they're not ready to deal with the consequences. And so I think there's an interesting conversation there about how do the Green Party become more prominent on issues that people don't associate us with, like the security of this country, but do them through a different lens. So not always talking about nuclear weapons, but actually saying how we're going to protect this country from a pandemic, from the climate crisis, from food insecurity, as well as the security of this country from the more traditional things as well.
So it's interesting, is it? So you're, and I think this is clear tension with some of your members, because of course some of your members will say, and I've interviewed them and others of your kind of sort of political bent, they'll say, look, the climate crisis is the most existential thing that's facing our planet.
And they're right.
Almost talking about anything else is wasting our time, because everything else pales into insignificance by comparison. What is distinctive, I think, for people to understand listening to this about your approach, is that it's different. You don't agree with that?
Well, I do agree it's absolutely the existential threat, and I agree that it's rooted throughout everything. So if we talk about the housing crisis, for instance, a housing crisis, we need rent controls, and you can absolutely link rent controls with retrofitting. The fact that we're still building houses right now that will need to be retrofitted in just a few years' time. What I mean by retrofitting, so if we're insulating homes, for instance, that's going to keep them cool in the summer, warm in the winter. That reduces bills, vital in the cost of living crisis. It creates green jobs. That's amazing for working with the trade unions.
That's the point, isn't it? You don't start from the climate element. You start from an economic element.
I think that's exactly right. So if you're Greenpeace or you're Extinction Rebellion or an organisation that aren't a political party, it makes absolute sense that your whole thing is the climate crisis and to raise the alarm on the climate crisis. And I work with those organisations really well, and I'm really glad they exist. The Green Party's job is to campaign, to win seats, to change things within Parliament, the London Assembly, councils. So to make sure that we're using the power that we gain to be able to create change. To do that, why would you start with an issue that you know people aren't as concerned yet about as they should be? Now, it's part of our job, but more the wider movement's job, to raise the salience of that issue, to make sure that when people wake up, the first thing they're thinking about is the fact that we're not spending enough money on climate adaptation, that we're at risks of floods and wildfires, and we need to reduce our emissions. We're not in that place, though. We're in a place where people are worried about putting food on the table, heat in their homes. But the really important point here, and it's probably the most important point I'll make, is if we talk about inequality, the poorest communities are the ones that are being hit as hardest by the climate crisis. So they're not separate conversations. They're the exact same conversation.
Do you think that maybe part of, let's broadly and rather inexactly call it sort of environmental movement, all of the, whether it's the political party, the Green Party, or some of the groups you've identified, has there been an element in the past of maybe it being dominated by quite middle-class people who don't really understand just how hard-pressed people are? Is your leadership and what you're saying, in a sense, a critique to that view?
Undoubtedly, it's a searing critique of it, of the broader left and the broader Green movement. I think it's really striking that Assad Rehman, who used to be the CEO of War on Want, so this is a charity who work exclusively around global South inequality and around poverty, is now the CEO of Friends of the Earth. And I think that's Friends of the Earth, along with Greenpeace, also recognising that the real big threat to our environment is inequality. It's multimillionaires and billionaires, the big polluters, Shell, BP.
Do you think that people in the Green movement, and I say rather than just the party, the movement, let's call it that, have been patronising in the past about these matters?
Yeah, I think that's true as well. And I think, I want to balance this with there are stalwarts of that movement who have been talking about this for decades. It's not like I've just arrived and I'm the first person who has linked environmental, social, racial and economic justice. There have been people doing that for a long time. But for a long time, there were slogans and phrases that look to minimise the devastating effects of poverty and the devastating effect of needing a job or needing employment with being insignificant matters in light of the climate crisis. Now,
wonderful. So I'll leave a link in the description. You can watch the entire interview. But I really wanted to highlight this point, and I think this is so important, not just for the Green Party, but dealing with the climate crisis. We've heard for so long from middle-class people, from hippies or whatever, saying, look, we need to do this. And they were completely correct. But they were not able to sell this message because ordinary people were concerned with their own issues. The cost of living crisis, the NHS, housing, all of these things. And as Zack has pointed out, dealing with the climate crisis helps ordinary people as well. And I've raised this on the channel before, for example, as Zack has mentioned, retrofitting homes, putting in insulation. This creates jobs because you need people to put in the insulation, but it also brings down energy bills. Immediately, people's homes are insulated. And then, of course, when it comes to rented properties, of course, if you're renting the property, you don't have control over that. So you need legislation to enforce this on landlords. Landlords need to be forced to upgrade the homes for ordinary people because the ordinary people are paying the bills, not the landlords. So there needs to be change in legislation on so many levels. So approaching all of this from the angle of, okay, we're the Green Party, we need to deal with the climate crisis, but we also need to understand that we can't just preach to people. We actually have to engage with them, engage with the issues that they face on a daily basis. The cost of living, energy bills, housing, things like that. And understand that, okay, we want to fix these problems for ordinary people, but we also want to convince them that engaging, embracing environmental solutions is actually beneficial to them. Zack has also talked about inequality. Inequality is a huge problem. The poorest people in society are being impacted more by the climate crisis than the richest in society. The richest can protect themselves economically. They can build a wall to keep out the problem in a metaphorical sense and maybe in a literal sense. But ordinary people can't. Ordinary people are suffering the consequences as a result of forest fires, flooding, the worst effects of climate change. And then on the ordinary person's level, energy prices going up, they're the most impacted. Food prices, this is really important. Food prices going up impact the poorest in society more than anyone else because they spend so much of their income on food. So the Green Party really have an opportunity here to embrace the issues that affect ordinary people through the lens of the climate crisis. And I think Zack Polanski is the person best suited for this. The party of old, middle class, slogan driven didn't cut through. They were disconnected from the problems of ordinary people. And I think under this new leadership, it seems, at least on the surface or at the beginning, are really turning a corner, and they're able to connect with ordinary people because they're talking about the problems ordinary people face through the lens of the climate crisis. So once again, I do recommend listening to the entire interview. It goes on for almost an hour, but it is really interesting. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.